All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here to take some time and chat a little bit about the all the bills that were signed and will be law here soon shortly that impact our community colleges and impact you all. So thank you for taking the time this afternoon. I am FACCC Executive Director Evan Hawkins. Going to be handing it over to our Associate Director Stephanie Goldman, who will be leading us through today's presentation. And then we'll have some questions, Q&A at the end. But as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to them. So with that, Stephanie, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. For you, those of you I don't know, I'm Stephanie Goldman. I'm the Associate Director here at FACCC. I'm a registered lobbyist, and bills are kind of my life. So I'm going to jump right into this. It shouldn't take too long. But I appreciate you attending, and please let me know if you have any questions. All right. So I'm going to go through, first I'm going to go through kind of the process we went through. And part of the reason why I'm giving a summary on that is because I also want to invite anybody who has any issues that have come up that you think would make a great bill idea to please email that, send it over, talk to a committee person, and let's get that going. Some of our most successful bills have come, in fact, almost all of our most successful bills have come from the field and from folks just like you. So please don't be shy. Share any ideas you might have. So the legislative session typically begins in January or February. A bill is introduced by a member of either the Senate or the Assembly. In March through May, the bill is heard in committee hearings. For our bills, it's typically in Assembly Higher Education and Senate Education. We'll then get them heard in appropriations if there's any cost associated with the bill. And then by the last week of May, any bills will hopefully go to the floor of the House for a vote. It's important to remember that the cycle is sort of built in a way to try to kill bills at every step of the way. Bills die in committee hearings. They most often die in appropriations. And generally, if they get past those points, they will pass the floor, at least in Sacramento. From June through August, we go through the same kind of procedure. And then in September, the governor has about a month or so, he has a month to sign, not sign, or veto a bill. In California, it's a little bit different from the federal system. If a governor does not sign the bill, it automatically becomes law. In this case, we were a little bit nervous. Governor Newsom was traveling quite a bit in September. He had hundreds of bills in his desk, and he waited all the way up, and it took him all the way up to close to the deadline to get them either signed or vetoed. The higher education bills, for the most part, were signed around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock last Friday, which was the constitutional deadline. So it's been a pretty interesting year. So let's look a little bit about what Governor Newsom. Lawmakers sent around 1,166 bills to the governor in 2022. The governor ended up signing 997 of those. 169 were vetoed, and he actually ended up with a 14.5% veto rate. So this is pretty consistent with his past veto rates. Last year, we saw a much lower veto rate, but last year in 2020 were COVID years. There were restrictions on how many bills legislators were actually carrying, so it was a little bit different. And then 2019 was a normal year, and he vetoed around 16.5%. This veto rate is pretty consistent with what we saw from Jerry Brown as well, who tended to fluctuate between a 10 to 15% veto rate. So let's talk about FACCC-sponsored legislation. This year, the FACCC-sponsored AB 2315, that was our primary bill, and that was a bill authored by Assemblymember Arambula from the Central Valley. This bill required community colleges to allow students, faculty, and staff to use their chosen names when legal names were not required by law. This was a great bill in part because there was no real cost associated with it. We actually didn't get any serious opposition. We ended up with some Republicans supporting it. Most abstained or voted against it. But in Sacramento, that's such a small amount of people, it didn't have a huge impact. On the whole, it's been a bill that's really brought organizations and folks together. And even last Friday, I was presenting to the Student Senate, and I had a student who came up to me and said she was super grateful for this bill. because she has an English name she prefers to go by, and now that she doesn't have to go through the explanation of why she prefers that name. So it's going to benefit a lot of students, faculty, and staff, and we're super excited to see it signed into law. Now, this bill won't actually go into effect until January 1st. However, a lot of colleges saw it coming down the pipeline and have already started implementing it, and some already had chosen name options anyway. Other sponsored legislation, we sponsored Senate Resolution 45. We actually started that resolution back in 2021, but it took 2 years just by virtue of the legislative year happens sometimes. And this was a resolution recognizing the importance of academic freedom for community college faculty. We do want to do more on the academic freedom side of things. We have an academic freedom conference coming up on Friday at Berkeley City College. Highly recommend you attend because we're seeing a lot happen on this front, both nationally and statewide. So this is a really important topic and one that's not going to be going away anytime soon. We also sponsored the full-time faculty hiring audit alongside CCCI. This was authored by Assemblymember Lowe. This was an audit on full-time faculty hiring, and it did end up passing back in June. Audits don't need to go to the governor, so we were able to skip that part. FACC had some co-sponsored legislation this year as well. We generally do co-sponsor quite a few bills if we can. Typically, we partner with the union, CFT, the independents, and CTA on these items. This year, we co-sponsored AB 1505, Rodriguez, alongside CFT and CCCI. That was a bill that would re-bench the faculty obligation number to present levels. It was kind of a challenging bill because we ended up doing what's called a gut and amend back in December and January, which is where you take another bill that had already been introduced and you literally gut it, take all the language out, and then amend it with a different topic. So in this case, it became a faculty obligation number bill. And it actually got pretty far. It went past its first house, passed in Senate Education, and then it ended up dying in the Senate suspense file. So didn't pass, didn't make it to the governor's desk, but for a faculty obligation number bill, we were actually kind of pleased with how far it went and hoping to do more with this in the future. We also co-sponsored AB 1752. This was the Santiago bill that would create pay parity by requiring districts to adopt the terms of compensation for part-time faculty of the same ratio as full-time faculty for comparable duties. This one was primarily sponsored by CTA. We were co-sponsors, and I think there were a few other co-sponsors. It did die in the first house in the Assembly suspense file, so that was disappointing. I call it our annual tradition. We try to find ways to eliminate Calbright. This year, AB 2820 by Medina was the bill to eliminate Calbright. In other years, we've gotten pretty good support from houses. However, this bill, it cleared the Assembly side, but when it was brought to Senate Education Committee, they weren't willing to bring it up. We didn't have the votes and it did die. Now, again, this is an issue we're always talking about. Calbright hasn't seen very much success, if any. It serves so few students and it's a very, very expensive college. So it's something we are keeping on our radar for the future. I want to bring up AB 1856. This is an Assemblymember Medina bill. This is the bill that would increase the maximum amount of instructional hours part-time faculty may teach at any one community college district to about 80 to 85% of a full-time faculty member. We have actually co-sponsored 2 other variations of this bill, including one that was almost identical last year that was vetoed. Now, last year when this bill was vetoed, it was vetoed on the grounds of healthcare costs. So we had an estimate of about $200 million, and the governor said very clearly that's why he was vetoing it. So we came into 2022. We were pleased to see that Governor Newsom included healthcare for part-time faculty in his proposed January budget. We supported that. We worked hard on supporting that throughout the year. Shout out to CFT. They also put a tremendous amount of work in that, in both the 200 million for part-time faculty healthcare, as well as in trying to get this bill passed. This bill made it through the Assembly and the Senate with no real issues. However, it went to the governor's office and he vetoed it just over a week ago. It's extremely frustrating. We did secure the money for this, and according to his veto message, he thinks that there would be another $26 million in excess funds that are not included in the budget. I have to be, just to be entirely candid, quite a few of the vetoes we saw in this final week of the session were vetoed because of money that was not included in the budget. Now, we do have our disagreements on this calculation. We did work with his office in the Department of Finance on this, so this was incredibly frustrating. But part-time faculty issues are always a priority for FAC, and they will continue to be this. And we're just going to have to see where we want to go from here, but this one was disappointing. I wanted to go over a really brief list of FAC-supported legislation. You can see the full list on our website, but there were a couple of important ones that I wanted to highlight for you all. Cal Grant reform was, once again, a major push this year or this session, and we saw some great movements on the budget side for that. SB 1141 by Senator Lamone. This was the Chancellor's Office sponsored bill, and it basically closed some loopholes that got and made it so most undocumented students can pay in-state tuition. It was signed. However, there were some significant amendments to it in the end. For those who are into the retirement side, there were a couple of big bills this year that ended up getting signed as well. SB 868 by Senator Dave Cortese, relating to SBMA was signed, so there's now an supplemental payments plan for some of our longer-term retirees in place. And then AB 1667 by Assemblymember Cooper. This was relating to CalSTRS audits. This is an issue that retirement groups have been working on for years now. Going back to 2020, there were some issues with how CalSTRS handled their audits. The purpose of this bill is to protect retirees by ensuring those who make the mistakes will cover the cost of that mistake and not necessarily the retiree if the mistake wasn't their fault. So those both got signed. Great work for the retirement side of the world, and yeah, happy to support those. Now the big boy. This is the bill I think everybody in the system's been talking. It's gotten so much media coverage. If you ever go on Twitter, I'm sorry. AB 1705 has been everywhere. And this is the bill that would codify much of Title V and would build on AB 705 from back in 2017. The language they used early in this bill was calling it cleanup language for AB 705. However, AB 1705 went well beyond cleanup language. Some of the headlines I've been seeing regarding this are, it totally eliminates remedial education. It does eliminate certain placement methods, and it does have significant costs to it. FAC was opposed. We opposed it from pretty much its introduction all the way up until its signing. It never had sufficient support for our faculty, really takes away student agency, which is problematic. At the end of the day, Governor Newsom signed it on September 30th. So that was another frustrating item. There was a budget line for it. There was around $64 million included in the state budget. However, that's one-time funding, and this is not going to be a one-time thing. We're going to need ongoing supports for our students who are entering these transfer level courses, and we're definitely going to need ongoing support for our faculty who have to teach and who have to figure out how to get these students through. So that one was tremendously problematic and did make it. Now, since that was kind of a negative, I didn't want to end on anything negative, so I wanted to go through some of FAC's recent successful legislation, both a reminder of the incredible work that FAC does, and also an invitation to, most of these ideas came from faculty, counselors, folks at our colleges. So if you have an idea, don't think that it wouldn't be a great bill idea, because it really could be. Do contact us, let us know, because right now we're working on that bill package for next year. So AB 2315, which I already mentioned, signed by the governor, goes into effect January 1st. Last year, we sponsored AB 1326, which requires county human service agencies to designate a staff liaison as a point of contact for higher education counselors. That's been in effect for about a year now. The year before, we sponsored AB 2884, which allows districts to use restricted lottery funds for student basic needs. We also sponsored AB 595 relating to undocumented students and background checks, and then we were the sponsors of AB 705, which eliminated the 3-year time frame for transferring sick leave between districts. So we've seen incredible success. We are still having issues with outside groups coming in and really pushing their agendas, and that's something we're just going to have to continue working on in the coming year. A couple of things going forward. FACC advocacy, keep an eye out for action alerts starting in January. But the governor will be doing his budget proposal, or usually the first week of January. So we're going to be just going for it because that's so important. And we don't know what next year is going to look like. However, there's not a lot of optimism in the Capitol. It's looking pretty unlikely that we'll have another year like we did this year where we had so much money in California. Keep an eye out on funding formula, one-time funding advocacy for next year. We've already worked on the Chancellor's Office budget request. Undocumented Student Weeks of Action, quick plug for this. We are involved with this. This is something the Chancellor's Office puts on along with help from stakeholder groups from October 17th through 21. So keep an eye on your inboxes for things relating to that. Really quick, we do have an election coming up in November. It can be hard to get people to turn out for midterm elections, but it's so important. We have newly drawn districts resulting from the 2020 census. We have brand new districts. Some districts may not be as secure as others. Fact is, we work hard to support our folks, but just be aware of that. We're going to have around a third of the legislature turn over because of the districts, term limits, retirement, and legislators running for other positions. So please, please, please vote because we're looking at a whole new legislature for next year. And then if you haven't already, please join our Advocacy Listserv. We have a link on our website, but we also, the address is right here. You just send an email to this address, backadvocates@subscribe@googlegroups.com. You'll receive an automatic email, follow that link, and then click join. We will be giving updates. Not a whole lot happening in the fall because session has just ended. It is election season, but you'll see things start to ramp up when we get to January with the budget and then bills. And just a reminder, support FACC. We're a statewide professional membership association. We receive our strength through the power of the faculty who join. We've seen incredible successes in the legislature and also in budget advocacy. So please keep continuing to support us in the work that we're able to do for all of you. And a plug for Wendy, recruit a member. This is the 2022 membership drive. We are asking that people engage as much as they can to help us grow our FACC community. The more members we have, the more powerful of an organization we become. If you recruit a certain number of members, you actually do get entered into win an all-inclusive trip to Hawaii. So that's pretty exciting. And that's about it. I want to open the floor up for any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, feel free. I think we have the Q&A open. I think the chat is actually closed, but the Q&A should be open, or just raise your hand and we'll bring you up here to ask any questions you may have about legislation. Since we have a little bit of time as we await any questions that come up, I want to just provide a little bit of a, peering into the crystal ball here, if such thing exists, looking forward for next year. We know that our budget situation at the state level is going to look a lot different next year. We already know that revenues are coming in lower than expected. We had these last 2 years of very healthy budgets, but I think it's going to change next year. Of course, this isn't a budget webinar. We talked about the budget previously, but obviously the state budget does impact what bills get passed and what bills don't, and also impacts something like Calbright, which is receiving a lot of state funding at this moment. So It'll be interesting to see how things play out in a new budgetary environment, but obviously that'll be a big impact. So Daniel has a question, why are we of the belief that state funding for next year will be a lot lower? What are the reasons? Well, there's a few. Mostly it's just the economy and how that impacts our tax base. A big part of the revenue that we receive at the state is through capital gains taxes, through the stock market. Obviously, the stock market has been down for a few months now, and that really hurts the amount of money that our state receives. And so that's a big part of it, and probably, quite frankly, the biggest part of it. I'd have to go back and double check to see what other impacts there are. Obviously, you have state income taxes, but unemployment is still healthy in our state, right? You have sales taxes, and of course, inflation impacts the ability of people to make purchases, which impacts sales taxes as well. So that's a piece of it. But if you really want to know, it's look at the stock market. I think that's what the biggest challenge is going to be for where our tax base is at. And I think the economic situation is very uncertain moving forward, very uncertain. And we're going to have to keep a close eye on that. But certainly a lot can change. We're just a few months into the fiscal year, so a lot can change between now and January, and a lot can change between now and the end of the fiscal year in June. So nothing's settled quite yet, but so far it's not looking good. Now, having said that, we're not looking at a budget that's going to be a massive deficit, at least as of now. We're not looking at 2009, 2010. We're just looking at moving down a little bit in our funding, and sort of what will those implications be is the question. But stay tuned. We'll keep you updated on all of that, and of course we will be connecting our advocacy to fit whatever political environment that we're in. Thanks, Daniel. Hope that helped answer the question. Any other questions from anybody?
Cool. We will be posting this presentation online. Keep an eye out on the weekly. We'll be putting it there. Quick plug, keep an eye out also for a voter guide coming out from FACCC, including who we are, we've supported. And that'll also be in this issue, the upcoming issue of FACCC. So,
well, one other thing I want to say, sorry, Stephanie, I should elaborate on this, Daniel, is that despite when, I see we have one more question here too, so I'll get to that one, Cornelia. Despite what I just said about the funding going down, I don't think that's a reason for districts to not spend the money that's been allocated to them in the last budget. So if I was a faculty member locally, I would push back against that. I feel like there's some overreach, at least what I've heard so far, of some of our district leaders who are predicting doom and gloom, and therefore kind of really saying we're not going to spend, we're going to spend very little of the additional money we've received, or we're going to treat some of that additional money like one-time funding. And I recognize that every district's a little bit different. If you're a district that's on hold harmless and you're looking around the corner and seeing, a fiscal slope, I understand that has to be part of the calculation, but we just had two of the best budgets ever. And the taxpayers of our state are not asking for us to hold on to that money. They're asking for us to use that to serve our students. And of course, that means investing in faculty. So despite what I said about, there are some economic uncertainties, that should not prevent your district from using the money that has been appropriated within this particular budget. Okay, let's get to a couple questions that are in here. I know, Stephanie, we're talking about budget, so apologize for that here, but I'll jump in and answer some of these. So the 200 million, when will it actually be distributed and by which mechanism? I believe we're still waiting on guidance from the Chancellor's office on that, but hopefully we'll have that soon. If maybe I missed it, we got it recently. The part of the reason for the delay here is that the trailer bill, which is Assembly Bill 190, that's the higher education trailer bill, that was just signed on Friday as well, on Friday afternoon. And that had a lot of the language about how the 200 million, sort of the implementation of the 200 million. What we do know, because that was signed, is there is a possibility that your district could actually receive 100% reimbursement from the state providing part-time faculty health insurance. If it meets a few contingencies, again, I expect this to be laid out very clearly by the Chancellor's office soon. But some of those contingencies include essentially having part-time faculty health care that's as good as what your full-time faculty are offered, which I think that's a good contingency. But if your district does that, they could receive 100%. So stay tuned on that as well, Cornelia. It should be very soon. We should get that guidance. But again, the trailer bill language was just signed on that on Friday. So that, even though the budget was signed, months ago, that did take a little bit longer to clear that up. How can faculty use the learning loss money? Yes, one-time funding. So Daniel, I know I mentioned this briefly in a presentation I did previously, but again, and I hate to have the same answer for this one, but I think that we're going to have to see some more flexibility, some guidance as well from the Chancellor's office. But my perspective on this and kind of my understanding of the legislative intent of all the one-time funding, there's learning loss, the block grant funding, is to be able to, a lot of that can support faculty with professional development. It can support faculty with increased investment to support students. There should be quite a bit of flexibility on this funding. And when I would argue, as we talk about learning loss, and I was having a conversation the other day with a candidate that's running for state senate who's currently a school board member, and she was saying, about a lot of our students that were at our K through 12 are about to come to community college and have experienced this learning loss and will need additional support. And I think that needs to be recognized. And I think the bulk of that money should go towards those sorts of things, whether it, just I'm going off the top of my head here. Daniel, you probably have better ideas of things that could support students and faculty, but whether it's tutoring, whether it's smaller class sizes if possible, things of that nature, we know could be particularly beneficial, especially as we have to, at the same time, be incorporating and implementing AB 1705. It's a lot that's falling on the shoulders of faculty, but there is a lot of one-time money. And again, as I said, as we await guidance, I believe there's enough flexibility for our faculty leaders locally to advocate for that funding to support them as they support students. So it's kind of a long answer there and not maybe a specific one, but there is a lot of one-time money, and that money should go towards helping our faculty serve our students. All right, another question here. Do we have a percentage of what, the additional base funding adds up to, given that the COLA is 6.56, equates to 558 million statewide, and the base funding is said to be 600 million altogether? Is it fair to say that district got about 7% ongoing in addition to the 6.56%? Oh boy, I have to pull out a calendar here to figure out what exact, a calculator, and a calendar maybe as well, to see when, to figure out exactly what the percentage would be. I will tell you that it's, the base funding, I think, is 400 million. And I could pull this up here maybe as we get to another question here, but so it really, and then yes, the COLA is 6.56. So I would say that, I'm just going to pull this up. I apologize. This is going to just take me a second, but I want to make sure I'm giving the right information here. Give me one second. If there's any other questions right now, please add them in the chat as well, and I can jump to those as I finish looking this up. Come on, let's go here. Got my document. I just need it to load. Okay, here we go. All right, so yeah, so you're right. So the base increase is 600 million. Sorry, I misspoke. The COLA is 558. So what we're looking at is a significant amount of money just in COLA and base increases. You also have the part-time faculty, but of course that's outside of base. But those are some of the biggest new apportionments that we have within the budget. I'm trying to see if they allocate here a percentage. Obviously, that's a big amount. If the COLA is 6% and the base is 600, the COLA is 6% and that's 558, and the base is 600. You're talking about, math's not my strong suit here, but it's basically doubling that of an increase to the base. Let's just say 12%, give or take, a little bit less. I think that's the percentage you can say that would be increased to our base funding. Now, keep in mind, Cornelia, as part of this, some of that funding is going within the funding formula provisions and metrics. So it really depends on what how your district's doing within those metrics, right? So while some of it does go directly to the basic allocation, as Jason's mentioned here in the chat, there is a majority of it that goes within the metrics, meaning that if you're doing well in the supplemental or the success metrics as they're described, that could mean a little bit more than that percentage, right? So that is something to keep in mind. So it's really hard to say exactly what that number will be statewide, so that's really difficult to say. But overall, as we look at it from the 30,000 foot level, we can say that it's about that 12% number. And I apologize, I see some of you can't see the chat. Jason just mentioned that the 600 million for base or basic allocation is a similar percentage to the COLA, as I eventually, I think, got to in my rambling there. So yeah, so that's basically where we're at. And just, I mean, you all know this, right? Locally, is that that's a big number. I don't think we've seen, what's that at a state level? Nearly 1.2 billion in base funding in one budget year is a lot. So the challenge now is that districts are saying, well, we're not going to see that much moving forward, so we have to hold off and not actually allocate all that. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's incumbent upon faculty locally, and I know we have faculty union leaders here. I can see them to, when you're at the bargaining table or working with administration, to sort of recognize that we don't want to miss this opportunity. Who knows when we'll get this opportunity again? This is a real opportunity to serve our students right now and increase our investments in our system, which has been so significantly underfunded for so long. I mean, we're still underfunded even with this increase, but we don't want to miss this opportunity to provide additional resources at this moment in time. And no one has a crystal ball. We know that the economic situation is uncertain, but even if we have a decrease from what the governor allocated in the 2022-23 budget, it's still likely going to be much higher than it was just a few years ago. So keep that in mind as well, that we're coming off of 2 incredible years. So even if our budget goes down a little bit, you still have to compare it to what it previously was, and even when doing so, we're still at a level where we should be increasing investments moving on, and that's all ongoing money that we're talking about here. That the 550 COLA and the 600 in base is all ongoing. So so yeah, and then of course, that's just for right now. We know in 25-26 the hold harmless will be expired at that point. And then every single district will be receiving a TCR floor based off their total computational revenue. That's TCR, and that and that will impact things moving forward. But 2025-26 is a long ways away. We don't know what the situation will be like then. I can promise you that there's lots of legislators in Sacramento who do not want to see our community colleges face a fiscal cliff or even a fiscal slope. So we have our work to do over the next few years, but at this moment in time, we have a healthy budget that we should be taking advantage of. And I guess that's kind of the bottom line that I would say on the budget. And as we can transition to concluding here, that also does impact, again, some of the legislation we can do. So please, we would appreciate you all sharing your legislative ideas with us. This would be the time to do so. We have a number of ideas already, and we will be voting as a board at the end of this month on what bills we will be sponsoring. And then we will share that with all of our members, and that's what we'll be working on next year. In terms of the budget, we will do the same in January. That's when the January budget proposal comes out. So there's a lot of work to be done there, as well as we move forward ahead of another legislative session with, as Stephanie mentioned, a bunch of new legislators, and we are working between now and about a month from now in the election, hoping to get good legislators elected. So stay tuned on that as well. We hope to have your support in some of our PAC related work as well. Okay, so I think we're done with questions. Hopefully you all found this helpful. Again, appreciate you joining us on your lunch hour here. We will, as Stephanie mentioned, share this in our weekly newsletter. So please share it with your colleagues so they can, quickly, about a half an hour today. Hopefully that's not too long for folks to tune in and get a quick update on kind of where we finished off. And then, of course, what we've been talking about the last 10 minutes or so, where we might be moving in the future. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week.
Thank you.